Good morning and very warm welcome to you all for this NLA webinar as part of the Changing Face of London exhibition, seminars and book by the NLA. My name is Robert Gordon-Clark. I am Chairman of London Communications Agency. I'm been really pleased to be chairing this morning's session on sport and its role in regeneration. Now, 16 years ago, 2005, on July the 6th, I know Sean Dawson and a number of other people were in Singapore for the result of the Olympics, one of the great days in London's history. And the following day, the NLA was due to launch and open its first exhibition at Store Street with an exhibition called The Changing Face of London. We all know what happened the following day, a great tragedy in our capital city, and the opening was postponed. But when the opening did happen later on that summer, the NLA profiled nearly 30 projects that were changing the face of London back in the early part of this millennium. Two of those projects were Wembley Stadium, the rebuilding of it, and Arsenal moving to their new stadium at the Emirates, both of which opened within a couple of years of that exhibition. But the rest of the exhibition was really about more general development, houses, homes, offices, and not so much about sport. Jump forward to last year when the NLA decided to mark its 15th anniversary by updating that exhibition with now 50 projects. And one of the most telling things I thought when I was working on the project with the NLA was the increase in the number of developments that had a major sporting regeneration element. And we thought it was therefore a very good idea to bring together some speakers today to talk about this theme, a topic that, in my view, hasn't really been discussed much over the last few years. So we're delighted to welcome a panel of speakers, Donna Cullen from Spurs, James Saunders from Quintain, and Sally Stevens from Brentford Football Club, along with panellists Stephen Allen British, the former leader of Merton, Sean Dawson from Lillie Valley Park Authority, and Tom Jones from Populous. And we're going to discuss these themes now in quite a lot of detail with presentations from our three speakers. Before doing so, just a couple of housekeeping points, if I may. The first is if you have a question you'd like to ask, please type it in the Q&A. I'll be tracking those through the morning. We're running till 11:10, so we have some time, hopefully, for some questions. You can be anonymous or you can give your name, relax either way. Secondly, there'll be a poll at the end of the seminar after we finish to see how we've all done. So do use that if you want to. And I'd like to, before handing over to Donna, to finally thank the sponsors of the Changing Face of London programme, along with my company, LCA, Atkins and Channel Home. And then the supporters, Argent, Barclay Group, British Land, Canary Wharf, City of London, the Crown Estate, Nancy, Derwent, Peabody, Qatar DR, Quintain and Stanhope. Rich mix of businesses involved in supporting the capital. So without any further ado, and on this very cold morning, actually, Donna, by the way, of how many ground staff are all about getting matches this weekend across the country, the coldest one in Scotland. I know Spurs don't have that problem pitch, but I'd like to hand over to Donna Cullen. We'll talk about the regeneration stadium. Donna, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert, and thanks for having me on today. If you can go on to my main first slide, the next one, thanks, Molly. Our decision to build our stadium and stay in Tottenham was really brought into sharp focus by the riots that happened. And if you go to the next slide, Molly, you'll see that very graphic image. That was the second set of riots in Tottenham. It focused everyone's minds. We'd been hitting our head against a brick wall to try and get everyone engaged. But those riots in themselves were a catalyst. They happened in an area that has got some of the worst deprivation of any ward or borough in London. And it has suffered from a serious historical lack of investment for years. So as you can see on the next slide, our stadium, which is now delivered to this stage, really is the most significant development that's happened in the area. And we've got to look forward and see what else is currently going to be planned and hope that the momentum is maintained from what our stadium has started. We should also remember that this summer will be 10 years anniversary of those riots. And again, a question for us all as to whether or not we think enough has happened. In terms of what we have delivered, on the next slide, you'll see that we've delivered a stadium, but not just a straightforward stadium. I think we know what sport brings is it can do so much more. So when you have a sport venue delivered in a neighbourhood, it's not because we're in and out for a quick project and profit. We're in there for the long term. We decided in our long-term vision, we wanted to do so much more than just play our Premier League matches there. So the stadium is multi-use. We've already seen NFL concerts there. Wonderful to see international audience just streaming down the high road of Tottenham and, you know, laying bare the shelves for the shopkeepers for the first time. And we will also see, unfortunately not this past 18 months, but we will see Lady Gaga come to the stadium. We will see international rugby. And of course, we are the third largest conference venue in London. So all told, this stadium will bring nearly 3 million people per annum to the area of Tottenham. And as we go through on my next slide, you'll see the additions that we've also delivered. I think Deloitte's estimated we've delivered close to 2,800 jobs. We're up to nearly 4,000 jobs, and we've sought through the pandemic to preserve those jobs or to realign them with different sectors as we've gone through, but to make sure that when things do return to normal, that local people that have earned their jobs are back, and you'll see them working at our stadium and at the events. Additionally, on the next slide, you'll see that although I maintain we're a football club, not a property developer, we have actually delivered 400 new homes, 70% of which are affordable, and we have planning permission for a further 1,230. So a busy development portfolio, and certainly keeps our head of planning, Richard Serra, busy. Next slide, you'll see that we're also working with Architects F3 on creating a new neighbourhood, really exciting project, that wonderful historic Northern Terrace that we've acquired piecemeal over the years, to put a linear building that runs alongside the Sainsbury's and Lily White House behind, and the ability to attract the sort of tenants that will make this a vibrant place. And we always look to our neighbours, and I think that Argent, take our hat off to you. King's Cross is a stunning development. We always look to King's Cross and say, that is the way you do it. That's where you go from place change to place making. Neighbourhoods like this that we're working on Paxton 17 as its designation are really important to deliver proper regen. And on my next slide, you'll see that we've also, in addition, gone ahead with schools. It's one thing to beat a developer over the head with a Section 106, but it's another thing actually when there is a sporting venue. We're so embedded in the community. There are things that we are going to do anyway, and we're probably going to exceed what any Section 106 could lay at our door. The LAET is something we're incredibly proud of. We brought it to the area, we fund it. It's alongside the state aid funding that comes with, the state funding that comes with it. And in its second year, it's been named the Sunday Times Sixth Form College of the Year. It's for the brightest people in one of the most deprived areas of London to be taught by tutors from the top private schools. And this last cohort saw 10 Oxbridge places offered. So again, that is real regeneration. That is changing the education landscape on the ground in Tottenham. And additional to that, on the next slide, Molly, thanks. We've done a primary school, which is thriving, one of the biggest supermarkets in Europe, gym, shops. And again, the way we work and with our foundation is about making sure local people get those jobs. Next slide, Molly. Additionally, if it's all about bringing people to the area, the visitor attractions, the stadium tours have been fully booked for some time. We've just delivered the Dare Skywalk to open it, only to have to shut it, but I think we're all familiar with that. And we're now working on a pretty terrifying abseil stroke drop off the edge. And it's about bringing people to the area and making sure the area thrives and creating more jobs and more spend. Next slide. Deloitte's did some figures on here. I wouldn't look too closely because I think some of them need updating, but I always like to show this because yes, there's the headline figure of 300 million being pumped into the local economy each year, but there's also the reminder about the tax revenues. And when it's a sporting venue, it's more than what you can see over the right-hand side, which is the tax revenues generated from your residential and commercial schemes that we're familiar with. It's much more about increased employment and in a variety of sectors, but even more so when you look at major events being delivered, those that attend them start paying tax from the minute that plane lands at one of our airports, all the way through to travelling to our stadium, to spending in the local community, to buying a beer in the stadium. And it's really important we don't forget that, because that's part of how we need to get the buy-in from local, regional and national government. Thanks, Molly. Again, an added advantage when it's a sports venue and it's backed by a team stroke club such as ourselves, we're embedded in the community. So our foundation is incredibly well known for the work it does. And we look to try and work hand in hand with the public sector so that we get services that are delivered and services that reduce the cost and impact of neighbourhoods such as ours to the national economy as well. And on the next slide, you'll see probably a point that Tom Jones of Populous, our architects, and Chris Lee, if he was on the call, would make. When this building was designed, the architects, Tom and Chris, used the words about it being a civic building. It's designed very much with a civic nature. If you look at that image bottom right, we're one of the only very few stadia that our front door is right on a high street. We are right in the middle of the action, embedded in the community. And even before the pandemic, this building, our stadium, was used for the national ballot count. And since the pandemic, in all the challenging times, we have drive-through COVID-19 testing in the basement. When pregnant women weren't turning up at North Mids Hospital for their appointments, we gave over our media and player facilities, and they moved in en masse the antenatal clinic, delivering 41,500 appointments, testament to the work the NHS does. It worked fantastically well, alongside food distribution, and something that will be announced in a couple of weeks' time. The stadium will become a mass vaccination centre. And I think that says a lot really about the added regen and civic duty and contribution that a venue like this can make. Thanks, Molly. So what we're looking at here, when it's all told, and the numbers did keep rising, it's an unprecedented £1 billion private investment in Tottenham, an area that was desperately crying out for investment. And on the next slide, you'll see the fantastic new White Hart Lane Stadium. Hats off to TfL, because they came on this journey with us. They have worked to upgrade and build on the infrastructure and transport links, improve the option of train availability, lengths of trains, scheduling of trains. They've been hand in hand with us on this project, recognising the importance of investing in infrastructure alongside regeneration attempts. And on my next slide, thank you. Just some of the things that the politicians have said about the stadium and the scheme, the recognition of just what it can achieve. And also, I think importantly, on David Lammy's last comment there, when we as a club talk about regeneration, we talk about making the area better for the people that live there, and so great that other people might want to come and live there too. But it is about raising the quality of the environment. It's on our doorstep. We have a vested interest in making that development visionary and really looking to the future generations that can enjoy it. And on my next slide, I make the point that this local, regional, international, what it delivers. If we've learned anything from the pandemic, two things. People really should be able to live, study, work and play in their neighbourhood, not do vast, long commutes that take them away from the family for hours. Not necessarily buy into, if you want to get a great education, you have to leave the area where you live. We all have a responsibility. That is what drives us. That is what has designated a lot of the components that you've seen we put up there. Image on the left is an indication, again, of the nature of the building in terms of its contribution to London. That was lit for rainbow laces. When it was designed, I always discussed with our architects that it was an artwork, if you like, because you could illuminate it. Regionally, we have a real opportunity to create a new sport, leisure and entertainment destination, and we can't lose sight of that. There is a lot of pressure on councils to deliver housing, and predominantly social housing, but we have to make sure that we're more aspirational and the quality of what's being delivered is high. And then on an international basis, we will see visitors from all over the world, whether they're there in person or whether they're being broadcast around the world. Tottenham is very firmly on the global map. And just to end off very quickly, if you can flick through my next couple of slides, we have got a real challenge ahead to take this forward. And my next slide is my sort of notion. We describe this as the ripple effect. If you look at the next slide, you'll see that we've dropped the stadium in the middle. We have the opportunity now for the ripple effect of that to go outwards. Unfortunately, HDV to the east has not been possible to deliver, but that needs a rethink and see what we can do. And to the west, High Road West is now being discussed. And again, still lots more that we can do. But on my next slide, it really is time to start to mark a destination that's Tottenham. And as you can see from that, one of my favourite images, we are so closely linked to the centre of London. Thanks, Robert.
Donna, thank you. That was an amazing run through over only 10 minutes of an incredible 10-year story, actually, isn't it? And so those 10 years looking back, but you touched very briefly, just a quick question before I hand over to James. The next 3 to 5 years, what would you hope to see achieved on that penultimate graphic you showed of the wider regeneration? I mean, obviously for your own development, you hope to see that, but what else would you hope to see as
I would hope to see that others take the opportunity of the focus on Tottenham and what we've started and build on it. I think it's really important that we don't get sidetracked by any local political perspective, and that we stay with a vision that the people of Tottenham deserve. Again, I'm going to mention King's Cross. That's a fantastic example, and there's no reason why we can't do that and more in Tottenham, particularly given we've got the sporting element.
Thank you very much. Tom, just before I go to James, obviously, Donna kindly mentioned you a few times. Any other comments specifically on Spurs from your perspective, from what you heard from Donna?
Well, thank you, Robert. I think Donna makes some really interesting points about the challenges, really, that the club set us. A very ambitious intention to create this really multi-stadium. But I think the context of being on that high road was a big challenge architecturally. The conservation area, the need to kind of, how do we put this large stadium building onto a high road with the conservation area? And I think the club were great to work with, understanding, as Donna was saying, this idea that a stadium can be a civic building. We've moved a long way in thinking about what a stadium can be, from tin shed seating structures that we used to have, that can be much more architectural and civic. And that sort of relationship on the high road and the Tottenham experience, the way we were able to restore Warmington House, one of the old Georgian building, and integrate it with other activities from the club. And it's great to see that last slide. It's obviously been a year since I've been able to get up to Tottenham, but I've been keeping track of all the amazing things the stadium's been able to do in terms of the sort of COVID testing, the NHS facilities. And I think it points to the future where these buildings can be much more sort of community focused and really sort of live in their community. And it's wonderful to see.
Thank you, Tom. I'll come back to you later. I'm now going to hand over to James Saunders from Quintain to hear the developer's perspective, who's lived with pretty well Wembley Stadium for the last 15 odd years. James, over to you.
Thanks, Robert. If we can go to my slide. As follow on from Donna, we are a property developer. We're not a football club. And in fact, I'm not speaking on behalf of Wembley Stadium here. If you can go to the title slide, please. Now, this is really about Quintain's vision to create a new neighbourhood around Wembley Stadium and Wembley Arena. If you go to the next slide, you can see what we started with in 2002. You can see the old stadium, you can see the arena, you can see the old conference centre, the exhibition halls, a very tired set of buildings left over from the Empire exhibition in the 1920s, and then a tired retail park. This is a place that had a boom and bust economy. On event day, it was full of life and vendors and people selling food and drink and trinkets and various different other things. The local pubs were full, but on non-event days, it was a ghost town. And our mission was to create a new economic engine for the Wembley Park area, a 365-day economy for the area, and fundamentally to create a place to live in. So creating a neighborhood to live in was absolutely central to our vision. And if you can go to the next slide, you can see where we are 18 years on, a significant amount of development, over £3 billion worth of investment into the area, in a significant number of homes, particular build-to-rent homes, new retail, new parks, new car parks, and you'll see we're probably about 2/3 of the way through the regeneration. If you go to the next slide, you can see the full plan in outline. In green, you've seen the buildings that we've completed across different districts, and then the 2 remaining districts still to be completed. It's a development that has over £7 billion worth of development value, and you can see in terms of the mix, the vast majority of that is what we call multifamily, others call build to rent. It's rental apartments that we have built, purpose-built and professionally managed by us, a mixture of full market value and discount market value. About 11% commercial offices, and then the remainder being retail and other attractions. We go to the next slide. Our vision's always been about creating a joined up estate, and that really means paying as much attention to the spaces between the plots as the buildings themselves. The public spaces and the private gardens represent over 50% of the landmass of Wembley Park. We also pay a lot of attention to the ground floor uses. So it's not just about the buildings that you live in, but it's what happens at the ground floor. Because we all experience places at the ground floor level. We walk the streets, we look in the shops. So we built early doors, we built London Designer Outlet, the first outlet centre in London. We've added retail almost every year since then, independent retail up and down our high street, destination retail like Broxbourne, and other things like artist studios that we think are an important part of creating a new community vibe at Wembley Park. Of course, we have a strong entertainment culture. The stadium is actually operating between 32 and perhaps 40 times a year, unless, of course, we have people like Spurs coming to visit. And right now, sadly, is not operating. The arena is operating up to 120 times a year. We also have a theatre. We also have Broxbourne doing stuff. So having animation almost every day is important, but it's not all about mass animation and mass events. It's also about the solo busker. It's about the interesting art display. It's just giving people all the things that they enjoy in a major cosmopolitan city in an outer borough. And I think that's the secret of what we're trying to create here. It's also about long-term estate management. It's never been more important to keep a place clean and safe and secure, and that's something that we pride ourselves on with our own estate management teams. We also have strong relationships, obviously, with our big neighbours, Wembley Stadium, the FA, and a strong relationship with Brent. And we take our stakeholder management very seriously and our responsibility to the local community. And I think we're really lucky because of the National Stadium, we have fantastic transportation links, 12 minutes to Baker Street, lots of different train lines, significant car parking, coach parking, which I'll talk about later. The essence of successful regeneration is not just great placemaking, but you also need to have that strong infrastructure to other places. And we had that because of the stadium. And when the stadium was built, it was upgraded. The transport links were upgraded. We go to the next slide, please. I think the most significant new feature that we have brought as developer to the area is this establishment of what is the UK's largest rental community. These are purpose-built apartments built by us, managed by our operating subsidiary Quintain Living. We'll have over 6,000 apartments at completion, and they're characterized by, first of all, great architecture. Almost every building is different in design. That's really important to give you that neighborhood feel, that sophisticated, integrated city feel. Great design also inside the apartments, whether it's rooftop amenities, beautifully laid out apartments. We're trying to create something that's intensely livable. You go to the next slide, we've really pushed it in some areas. We were one of the first developers to become dog friendly, pet friendly, very important obviously in lockdown, but actually important before lockdown. We've built different ways of working from home. So you can see top right, the working from home sheds we've got on our Canada Gardens development. Bottom right, the lounges that we create for our residents, giving people the ability to work and socialize, and also a significant number of our buildings have gyms as well. Go to the next slide. But you step outside your apartment oasis, you still have those major anchors and you have those major footfall. And this is us really playing to our Wembleyness, our Wembley heritage. We have the outlet centre, which itself drives about 3 times as much traffic to the site as Wembley Stadium does a year. So we've changed the nature of the site in terms of the profile. The arena, the theatre and Broxbourne, all bringing footfall, animation, events, activity to the local area. Next slide. But we also recognize that a place that was very industrialized before needs wide open spaces and also green spaces. And you can see on the left-hand side here, the work that's been put in to regenerate Olympic Way, as it's actually officially called, Wembley Way, as the football fans call it. We have transformed that ceremonial walkway to the stadium with new pavings, new lampposts, new banners. It's a great tribute to the stadium and in many ways completes it. And if you go top right, you'll also see our most recent project. We've actually removed the ugly, unsightly pedway and now replaced it during lockdown with a beautiful set of granite steps, which will open in time for the EFL Cup this year. So we think we've added a lot of value to the existing stadium from an architectural and also from a customer experience perspective. We're also adding a lot of value to our own residents and our visitors' lifestyles. We've created beautiful parks. We've planted, I think, over 300 trees. And bottom right, you can see we've just delivered the first part of a 7-acre park, complete with water feature. So the livability of an area is incredibly important. Next slide. And so is new culture. So we haven't just relied on our sports and music credentials, which are strong. We've introduced new cultural activities, a new partnership with the Royal Philharmonic. We are turning public spaces, whether it be steps or lampposts or lamp boxes or telephone boxes, into art displays regularly. This is a place where you can come, enjoy. You don't need a ticket anymore to go to an event. There's lots of stuff happening. It's happening for the community and it's happening for free. Next slide. The 12-minute neighborhood is really something that we're focused on. It's very topical at the moment because of COVID, but it was something that was very much in our heart before, creating different neighborhoods with different character. And then we click on a little bit more. And different types of retail, both destination retail and neighborhood retail. I think I'm probably one of the only people that opened a pub at the back end of last year in London. Great to have new community infrastructure, whether it be pubs, bakeries, bike shops, all opening in and around the residential district. Next slide, please. And also a very significant investment in infrastructure. So this is the pink car and coach park that we opened at the early last year. This is one of the ways that we've managed to move a significant amount of car and coach parking away from the development areas and to the borders of the site. It's actually improved the connectivity to the North Circular because it's on the right roads on the way out. It's going to enhance the livability of the area for the local people. It means that not so many cars and coaches are coming through the actual residential areas. It is the largest car and coach park that's been built in Europe, and one that we've done in close collaboration with Wembley Stadium. And the next slide. And this is not just a story about what we do. These big projects are multi-year, several decades in fact, and they require strong partners. And we're lucky enough to have a strong set of partners, whether it be the FA, ASM Global, who run the arena, retail partners, the Royal Philharmonic, the Troubadour, Brent and the GLA. These are projects that require intense partnership, and we're proud of our partnerships and stakeholder management. And the next slide. And just to say, our end goal is to create a place where everybody feels welcome, whether it be for match day or non-match day, to shop, to visit, or to live. You know, we want everybody to feel welcome. It's a borderless place. You don't need tickets to come here anymore. And, you know, hugely proud of the work that we've done so far. But we've still got another 7 or 8 years to go.
James, thank you very much indeed. And James, a quick question before I go to Sally. You mentioned obviously a massive rental community, and therefore, unlike selling, you're much closer to your community than perhaps if you're just selling for ownership. So what's the feedback from your residents about living next to a major global sporting venue like Wembley? Because the perception from some could be that actually people don't want to live near stadia because it's, you know, once a week during the high season, it's chaos. I don't think it's like that, but tell me, what's their feedback?
I think, first of all, international people are coming because of the stadium and the renown of it. They've heard of Wembley, they land in London and they want to go somewhere that they have heard of and it resonates with them. Yeah. I think the second point is everybody recognises the transportation links are excellent. And because of that, it makes commuting to other parts of London really easy. So then you settle back into what's the neighbourhood I want to live in. And we offer the attraction of the sophistication of kind of zone 1 and 2, but in outer boroughs. And I think particularly now in a way that, you know, is resonating even more because of COVID. People want a bit more space. Yes. Every apartment has a balcony. We've got all this green space. We've got all this curated public realm. I think that aspect is appealing really strongly. I think when people come, they come with their eyes open. They come knowing the National Stadium is there. You can't miss it. No, it doesn't operate every day, as we said, but I think they quickly learn that it's a managed environment. We manage event day. We manage the crowds, and in conjunction with the stadium, we manage the traffic flows. As I said, we reposition the traffic flows on the outside of the site carefully. There's an intense cleanup activity that happens when required. So it's very busy for the 2 hours running up to an event and the 2 hours after an event. It's eerily quiet during the event. And I think people just get used to that, how it works. I think what they accept is they get better retail and better restaurants because of the footfall that generates. And I think they accept that trade-off. Yes, they love to get a few tickets along the way, but actually it's probably about the retail and the restaurants.
Thank you, James, so much indeed. Now, I'm delighted to welcome Sally Stevens from Brentford Football Club, because I think Sally has not spoken at an NLA event before. And Brentford is the newest stadium to open. And of course, as I think you all know, if you're a football fan, they're currently top of the Championship, knocking on the door of the Premiership. So Sally, over to you to tell us a bit about what's happening in Hounslow with Brentford Football Club. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Just by way of a bit of background, if you can move on to the next slide. I joined Brentford's new stadium project team in 2015, having worked for the former seven years for the local Member of Parliament for Brentford and Isleworth, Mary MacLeod. I'd also lived in the area for about 25 years. So this role at Brentford brought together both my love of football, but also a good understanding of the local area and politics, but very little knowledge of planning and property development work. So I have to say that on my first day, I had to ask someone to explain what the acronym CPO stood for, which I have to say didn't take me long to find out, because I spent the first 10 weeks holed up in Taylor Wessing's office in central London, preparing boxes of documents for a compulsory purchase order public inquiry. Anyway, before I go into too much detail, I just wanted to show a picture of our old home, Griffin Park, a much loved traditional football stadium, famous for a pub on each corner and a real football experience. For that, you could still stand to watch games at Griffin Park. It was a fantastic atmosphere. We're very close to the pitch, but very little legroom, no queues for everything in the stadium, and terrible toilets. So we were basically down to a capacity of 12,300 at this site, because various bits of the site have been sold off over the years. You can see we're sort of hemmed in by residential development. So we had very little choice but to look for another location if we wanted to develop to the size that we really needed to be for a sustainable future. If you go on to the next slide, you can see where we were and where we moved to. Brentford fans fought for many, many years to try and keep the club in Brentford. There were many plans to move us outside, but we were very keen to stay within our local roots. And it was actually a Brentford fan who first figured out if we could fit a new size stadium within this triangle of land, which was less than a mile from our original site. And still leaving enough room around it for some enabling residential development. Just to give you an idea of the size compared to what we've been looking at Wembley and Spurs, this is a 7.6 acre site, much, much smaller. But it was also very close to where we originally founded the club, so it meant a lot to us. On the next slide, you can see an extract from Hounslows, London Borough of Hounslow's Great West Corridor Plan. We've got very good relationships, particularly over recent years, with London Borough of Hounslow, particularly with Councillor Steve Curran, the planning officers, and also both of the local MPs. They worked with us really every step of the way and shared our vision of trying to keep Brentford within Brentford itself. And they've come with us on the journey from the outline planning permissions secured in 2014, through various reserve matters applications and section 73s, and we still have a few bits still going through planning. But this extract shows how important Brentford Stadium, and you can see the Brentford Stadium quarter there, is to the regeneration of the whole area. And we're really pleased to say that the Great West Corridor is also now an opportunity area within the new London plan. So I think it shows here Brentford Stadium is right at the centre of the development of Brentford East, and hopefully it will come with lots of other developments that are all, many of them are starting already, and many of them going through planning at the moment, to regenerate the whole area with hopefully some much needed transport and infrastructure developments too. The next slide shows a photo of our site pre-development, which I think highlights quite clearly why we were so keen to make it our new home. In the top left there, you've got the River Thames and Kew Gardens, and just off to the right, at the bottom right corner there, you've got Gunnersbury Park. And you can also see in the bottom right there, the elevated section of the M4, which puts us right on what was originally known as the Golden Mile and is now known as the Great West Corridor, and also puts us equidistant between Heathrow and central London and next door to Kew Bridge Station. But there are also quite a lot of challenges with the site. The red triangle you can see there is formed by 3 railway lines, which I'm sure many of you will know makes planning and development quite challenging. We also had an adjunct of land to the left of that triangle, which was crucial for unlocking the whole area, because we needed a new bridge across one of those railway lines. The owner of that site was refusing to sell, hence the compulsory purchase order I mentioned. We also had a number of tenants already on this piece of what was brownfield site, including a waste transfer business, and it was quite polluted land. We originally entered into a relationship with Barratt, who bought the land in 2008 as part of a deal with us to develop the new stadium. But obviously then we had the property market crash, and there wasn't really a desire on their side to progress it at that particular time. So we then had to enter into some negotiations to try and buy the land ourselves, which we managed to do thanks to our owner, Matthew Benham. And we also then selected a development partner, Wilmot Dixon originally, and then bought out by EcoWorld London. So AFL Architects took on the challenge of trying to fit an extended stadium and residential areas into this triangle, and they also worked with Arup later in the process. And the next slide, you can see the master plan, how it was developed with the stadium right at the centre. It's a 17,250 capacity stadium surrounded by 4 development areas that will deliver, in conjunction with our Griffin Park site, around 910 new homes, a new public square and some commercial elements. and also that railway bridge I mentioned, and new link to Kew Bridge Station, which is at the bottom of that diagram. So within the stadium itself, there's 2,900 premium hospitality seats, something which we didn't have any of really at our old stadium. And it's also got Premier League ready media, lighting and outside broadcast areas. But the stadium itself has always been about more than football, which we've heard from other stadia as well. Rugby was always very much part of our plans right from the beginning, and a key part of making the stadium financially viable. So we're very glad to welcome London Irish to, excuse me, to our stadium to play their games back in the capital. And also, I think flicking onto the next slide, the other thing to really stress here is the importance of our community sports trust. Our stadium development is going to provide a new purpose-built home for our award-winning community sports trust. And the community value that the sports trust delivers within the local community, more than £12 million a year across 100+ schools, and engaging with so many people, right from young people through to older people. It's been fundamental to us managing to achieve a planning consent that departed from standard planning guidelines and doesn't currently contain any affordable housing. The next slide shows a CGI from Eco World London, and it just shows you how our new stadium nestles lovely, delightfully amongst the residential developments that we've got. But you can also see on that image there how the stadium is going to create a new green route from the River Thames, which is right at the base of that image, through the stadium and up to Gunnersbury Park, where there's a new multi-million-pound sports hub, which we're a strategic partner in delivering. So the next slide, here we are at our new stadium. It's taken almost 20 years since that small triangle of land in West London was first considered as a new location for Brentford Football Club. And we've been through 2 global crises in that time and lots of planning applications. But we're finally here, sort of. This shows one of our games. I think it was against Derby. Robert, you'll be pleased to know.
It was against Derby,
where we had 2,000 fans who were able to attend in December. The stadium is already pretty special, but when it's full of fans, it's going to be something else. And we really hope it's not going to be too long before we can welcome our fans, and hopefully you can come and visit sometime soon.
Thank you, Sally, for that indeed. It was a very dull 0-0 draw, I remember.
It was.
I'm going to open up now to the panel because I want to go to Stephen Allen British now, because the story of Brentford in some ways has some interesting parallels, although obviously they were only moving within, but you brought Wimbledon back, Stephen, but in some ways very much that community feel stadium. Tell us a bit about the narrative around Wimbledon coming back to their home, Stephen. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Robert, and thank you to the NLA. Yeah, this is the greatest story ever told with regard to a stadium. This is fan-owned, this is community, this is a club that, as you know, was kicked out by the FA, who said it wouldn't be in the wider interests of football for them to come back into the league, let alone back to Plough Lane. And so it took planning permission, was unanimously passed, the whole council, all the parties, in December 15. It's a story about sporting intensification for that area, and that's what the inspector agreed to. It was 2 developers, 2 architects secured by one Section 106 agreement, and there's the Dons Stadium there. We can stick to that just that one slide, because that's what it says. The Dons are back home. 20,000 seaters, starting at 9,300, and the first phase of the last phase of the housing should be finished by 2021. Leisure club, shop, retail, store for the club. 800 units of housing, and that's very much needed in that area. Conference facility, one of the biggest in the borough, and that should be helpful, as well as a museum for this great story of a club franchised out to Milton Keynes, setting up again on Wimbledon Common in 2002, and back in the league, back at Plough Lane. Section 106, very important, Section 106. You have land that is now partly owned by the club and by the Housing Association, Merton Catalyst. Stadium land handed, over 40 million contribution towards the construction of the stadium, 1 million to local transport in Wandsworth. We've worked with the neighbouring borough as well, £250,000 to local parks, again in Wandsworth, 400,000 to the local NHS, again with St George's quite close, 13 million still community infrastructure levy, 3 million to the mayor for Crossrail 1, 10 million to the council for Hayden's Road. You know the mascot is called Hayden. Hayden's Road is a long road, a very Victorian-esque road that needs huge support, and some money there for the world-leading children's poker theatre. And so what made this happen was emotion and sheer wantonness by a community-based club. We've had calls from Argentina, from Brazil, from Greece, throughout the planning application, throughout the Section 106. And as you know, the fans raised money as well. And they've received all the keys to the stadium recently, Joe Palmer, the chief executive. Yeah. And there will be regeneration, copycat tactics. As Donna said, the ripple effect will take place. This is a story of a club that is not just back in the borough, not just back in the ward, Wimbledon Park, not just back in the neighbourhood with Brentford just a mile away. Well done to Brentford. Back in the same road, back in Plough Lane. It's a real story, and the regeneration that will bring for the area is something to behold. I'm very proud of the fans, the Dons Trust, everyone involved with the club.
Stephen, when thank you. I know how much it's meant to you and to your colleagues at Merton. When it was first debated, when it first came up, Stephen, were you confident? Did you feel that this would be a really tough political battle? Because, you know, in tight community areas, some people do perceive a football stadium as a negative, let's be honest. So did you initially think this is going to be a tough sell? Was it as tough a sell as it turned out to be, or was it actually smoother?
Very smooth because of the club, because of the fans. They're so well behaved. They're so intense. They're so driven. And it was a pleasure to work with the club. But don't forget, I was brought up by Craven Cottage, not along Fulham Palace Road, by Stevenage Road next. And I know what a club means, the floodlights of an evening. I think people do welcome a stadium right next door to it because their kids are so enthralled by it. So there were issues with Boris, there were issues with Wandsworth, but we all worked together, and I think everyone supported the club coming back.
Thank you. And of course, Fulham have expanded a bit, haven't they, over the few years? And I know you're a strong fan there. I'm going to bring Sean in a minute, but just Tom, I know I brought you in earlier, but I'm very interested, Tom. You've listened to some wonderful presentations. From an architect's perspective, for your next gig, wherever that may be, have you picked up any key lessons that you would apply to the next stadium you do?
Yes, I think if it's possible to put up the slide that I prepared, it paints a really remarkable story of sporting transformation in London. You know, I think we all know that London's an amazing sports city, but if you look at the 4 examples that will come up shortly on this slide, Emirates in the top left, the Olympic Stadium in the top right, Wembley bottom left, Tottenham bottom right, and I've been very lucky to work on 3 of those. So to have had 3 major stadium projects in the last sort of 15 years in one city is amazing. We get requests from clubs and cities all over the world to come to London to kind of see the success of these regeneration schemes. And I think, you know, it's sometimes we forget now when we look at just the sheer amount of development, and you've got Brentford and Fulham and Wimbledon, and there's other, the O2 Arena, plenty you could add to the list, that 20 years ago, people didn't want stadiums in cities. Big push to move them outside. And when we started on Arsenal, there was certainly a move to push outside of the city. Wembley, big conversation in the country about should it be in Birmingham, Manchester. And now I think, you know, Tottenham epitomises really the strength of what a stadium regeneration project can bring to its community. And it's just amazing to see.
Looking ahead, what would be your, if you were dragged in to see an owner of a football stadium and said, I want a new stadium, what would be your first 2 points you'd make to him or her at that stage?
Well, I think, you know, for any sports club, and Daniel Levy at Tottenham set this out very clearly, you know, firstly, the stadium has to be an amazing place to host the sport. But equally, I think they now hold this balance of it being, you know, the opportunity for it, as we were talking earlier, about being a piece of civic architecture. So this broad thinking, and that sort of links in, of course, with the commercial aspects. You know, these are not cheap buildings to build. They need to have a viable business plan. And also, I think, as a couple of the speakers have touched on, they take a period of time. They take a period of time to come through planning. They take a period of time for the master plan to be built out and to see the sort of results of the positive results of what they bring. So there's a lot of patience that's needed, and I think perhaps I think when we talked to Daniel, we talked to Danny Fitzman at Arsenal. If they knew what they knew going in, would they have gone in? But I think they both sort of reflect at the opening, you know, that it was absolutely worthwhile doing it.
Thank you, Tom, very much. I have a few questions which I want to come to. Well, thank you to the audience already for pinging a few of those. But I really want to hear from Sean Dawson, because I want to open the debate slightly wider now with Sean as the Chief Executive of the Park Authority, running a number of sporting facilities post-Olympic legacy. Sean, you're having listened to all the presentations and your perspective on where the leisure and sporting industry is from how you see it. I'd love to hear from you, Sean. Over to you.
Thank you, Robert, and good morning, everybody. And truly inspired by those presentations, and thanks very much to all the presenters. I mean, well, what really I think strikes me, Robert, is that, you know, across all those presentations, when I look at the Park Authority and its delivery of 3 legacy venues and plans for a significant additional venue with the Twin Olympic Pad Ice Centre in the coming couple of years, and hopefully getting on site this summer, is the philosophy which, whether it's a public asset or whether it's a private investment, that commercially driven, community focused philosophy, which I think is consistent and needs to be, whether it is a private or public investment. And I think that's crucial, I think, to the future sustainability of sport and leisure venues. I mean, there's a wider debate in terms of post-pandemic, when the focus on sport and physical activity will be greater than ever, yet there'll be a paucity of funding within the public sector. How do we look at institutions such as football clubs, housing developers, other investors, other bodies, to perhaps look creatively, as football clubs have done already, as I'd like to think the Park Authority has done with its approach to its legacy venues, and of course with the Ice Centre on the horizon as well. So I think that's what really strikes me, is that, I mean, private investment by its very nature has to be commercially driven, but there is that bigger picture which the clubs clearly have and have demonstrated, and that's, you know, and that will carry on. But I think, you know, in our own way, the Park Authority, in a more local way, but certainly the philosophy is the same, the principles are the same. I think there are lessons there which will become, I think, more significant now for local communities, that relationship between regeneration, between big investment and ensuring that those opportunities are there going forward.
Sean, how concerned are you at the moment about leisure facilities generally within local government? Because these big iconic venues at Brentford, Wimbledon, Spurs, Wembley, they are, but on the ground, the local leisure centre, the local community facilities, the local parks and pitches, you manage what, 10,000 acres of open space. So you know probably more in scale terms, more than any, how challenging that is in the current climate. Are you worried for grassroots leisure and sporting facilities at the moment?
Yes, very concerned. And I think it'll be interesting to observe when we finally do come out of this lockdown and we see sports facilities reopening, how many don't actually reopen, because local authorities do not have the funding to pay directly or pay third parties to operate those venues. Local authorities are the #1 provider of sport and leisure facilities. But I think there is certainly a case, and I think it's really accelerated a process that was perhaps moving in this direction anyway, to look more creatively in policy terms, in how we actually start to sustain what we have got, but also deliver new facilities going forward. Yes. And I think it does need that change in mindset from many local authorities as to how these investments are funded, how they're operated, and how at the same time, whilst they are commercially driven, they have to be viable in the long term, whether they're private or public investments. But in so doing, you maximize that social and economic benefit. I'm confident there are models that can achieve that. And I think the football clubs have demonstrated that very clearly. And so I'd like to think that we're achieving that with our legacy venues, and we will do so with our Twin Olympic Pad Ice Centre in the heart of East London, which will have a significant impact in so many ways in that area of Leabridge Road in the west of Waltham Forest. But I think in the short term, certainly concerned in terms of the fallout from what we've been through. But I think what it will do, you know, it's necessity certainly is the motherhood of invention. I think it will allow great minds, as have been on show this morning here, to come together, perhaps with local authorities, to perhaps look differently at how we do maintain what we've got, but actually develop on that and look at high quality experiences that are sustainable, but very much more, I would suggest, private sector led.
I mean, perhaps a session for the NLA to look at in the future as one of their programs. We've got about 15 minutes now, and I want to throw it open. Molly, thank you so much for piloting the slides so wonderfully for all the speakers. I think we'll now go to full screen view. That's lovely, so I can see all our panel and speakers. I wanted to start, Donna, with a question for you, from a very early question from one of the guests about the inevitable impact when you're taking the CPO process, and I know Sally mentioned CPO, about local businesses, the ability to return or to stay. How was that handled at Spurs?
So, it was a massive land assembly project for us, and one of the reasons why a sporting venue is so difficult to deliver. But we ended up by relocating 71 businesses, and we only had an issue with one of those. So 70 businesses were successfully and amicably relocated, and we worked hard to do that properly. We worked hard on making sure the offers were good, that they were fully supported with property professionals to help them find alternative locations, and that the deals we did with them worked for them. And I think the vast majority did stay in the borough. There were some where families decided that they didn't, it was a great opportunity to sell and move on and do something different. So everyone took something from it at that time. But yeah, 70 on an amicable basis. One went to CPO, which was the very well-known archway metalworks right on our halfway line. But I have to say, even that we managed to find the end amicably. And in fact, I asked them to produce the metal shell for our time capsule.
All right.
Yeah.
And Sally, I mean, the CPO at Brentford was just one landowner, but apart from that, the acquisition of all the title interests was, well, that was sorted, I suppose, by Barratt, was it, to a great extent initially, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. So it was, you know, it was one, at least it was one main piece of land, and then the separate piece that had to go to the CPO. Yeah.
Moving on to another question, and obviously one of the big topics for the NLA at the moment is the sustainability agenda, Tom. Interesting question about, is it possible to look more at retrofitting and expanding and rebuilding a stadium? This is from Chris Ratcliffe, and particularly at Anfield, what's happening at Anfield. Or do you feel that, particularly when it comes to stadia, that particularly some of the older stadia, that it's probably have to accept that it is a complete reworking for all the environmental impacts that might bring?
Yeah, it's a really interesting challenge to consider, you know, what can you do in terms of retrofitting, refurbishing existing, as opposed to the benefit of the new build. And, you know, at Tottenham, we had a long conversation with the team there about the pros and cons of that. Clearly, sport is moving forward very fast. Fans' expectations of the facilities they want, the commercial opportunities that we can bring now. So, yes, there are ways in which you can creatively refurbish. But I think Tottenham was interesting because, first, of course, the decision to stay on the existing site,
yes,
to demolish and reuse a lot of the material that came out of that demolition. And I think one of the best examples being the polished sort of concrete floors. Instead of adding all the expensive floor finishes, we were able to use the actual physical material from the ground in the construction. There's a lot of technology now, obviously, with LEDs that are improving that, waterless urinals. But you know, these are big buildings, and it's reducing the embodied energy in the construction where we think the most benefit comes. And that's where, again, if you look at Tottenham with the lightweight roof, there are lots of ways in which we can try and reduce the sort of environmental impact. But these are buildings, and Daniel was quite clear about this. This is a building that's going to be in Tottenham for the next 60, 100 years. You know, they are embedded in their community. So you have to balance these up with a very long-term perspective.
Yeah, and I think at Brentford at Sally, there was quite a move. I know that Griffin Park, quite a lot of bits of Griffin Park got taken by the fans in the recycling, didn't it, I think?
Well, we tried to sell off whatever we could, but we have got a famous crossbar where we missed promotion, the trotter crossbar that's coming with us to the new stadium, and various other bits. But
that somebody actually wanted to buy a urinal, or is that a mythical story?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't heard that one. I can't imagine why. We had lots of people on our farewell Griffin Park tours wanting to take photographs outside the toilets, which I thought was bizarre, but that's where they'd spent an awful lot of their time.
Yes.
Okay, so that was quite amusing.
And Stephen, from at Wimbledon, I mean, the emphasis on trying to build as environmentally sustainable a stadium as possible nowadays, was that an important consideration when it came to planning?
Yes, it was. 2015, the planning application, famous day, December the 10th, and the sustainability, the materials, the LED lighting. It was a brand new stadium. It'd start from scratch, 2 major architects, 2 land developers. As I said, 1 Section 106, and what it needs is discipline, drive, and having the right experts to hand, and the patience of the supporters, but also engaging with all the stakeholders. So it's a superlative stadium, right for Plough Lane, right for the club, and the fans can't wait to get there. But it is hugely sustainable, the biggest venue in the borough for facilities, and I do believe that, you know, when the match is finished and the players actually come out to warm down or cool down, I think clubs should nominate 1,000 fans to stay behind and use the facilities for training, for exercise. I think there's a lot of that can happen in these football stadiums, 7-day operations. And as Sally said, the rugby's there. I think there may be some rugby discussions on Sundays with AFC as well.
Interesting idea, that. I'll certainly come to Spurs, Donna, if I can be one of the 1,000 running on the pitch after. Can I pick up on a question from David Taylor? And actually, I want to go back to Sally, because you showed the importance of the trust, the Brentford Football Award-winning trust. And I think you put up on the slide about 12 million, I think, a year in benefit to the community. That, I think, he was asked a question about the role of Section 106. That's actually enshrined in the Section 106, isn't it? I think that's correct.
It is, yes. And in fact, we're already going beyond that. But when the community sports trusts actually get into that venue, and then they can link up with Gunnersbury Park and the boating arches and everything else that they have there, they can really go to town. So we expect it to be way more than that, but it's going to be a significant contribution, and not just to London Borough of Hounslow, but across 5 London boroughs as well.
So the club works beyond it. So does the Top Foundation, doesn't it, Don? I don't think you're focused on Haringey, Enfield, and more broadly, Don?
Yes, Barnet, Waltham Forest as well.
And do you have an approximate figure on the value for the foundation?
Sorry, Robert, you broke up a bit there.
So I was saying, do you have an approximate figure on the foundation's contribution per year at the moment? Similar to, I mean, 12 million is the target that has to be achieved by Brentford, which is quite interesting, actually, in that Section 106. It's not quite the same for you, I don't think. Is that right?
No, I think it's different for us because we have projects to be delivered. But what we do have is a methodology which works out how much we save the public sector. But in terms of contribution and Section 106, it's more been by facilities and projects.
I finally didn't unmute myself properly. I'm conscious we're coming up to the end now, and we're just coming towards the closing, and I see some people are dropping off the call, but I hope those who are still on it have really enjoyed it. And as I say, there's a questionnaire very shortly to come, but I just want to go around very quickly to my panel. See if there's any final comments, any observations, particularly from actually the speakers who heard the panelists. Donna, is there anything else you wanted to add before we close off?
No, I think very useful session, and as you say, it's a topic that deserves wider discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, James. Anything from Quintain's perspective?
I think the sustainability agenda is very much in everybody's mind. You know, this is about commercial sustainability, economic and community sustainability, and all of those are part of our Wembley Park plan as well.
Absolutely. Sally, and thank you again for doing your first NLA event, Sally. So over to you. Anything else you wanted to add?
No, it's been really interesting though. Really interesting to find out about the stories of other stadia in a bit more detail. So, and I'm sure we could share some pain and also celebration at some point.
Yes, we must have a celebration when you can open properly, that's for sure. Stephen from Merton and Wimbledon, anything else? I remember, by the way, I went to the FA Cup final when you beat Liverpool 1-0. That was and I remember quite how grotty the toilets were at Wembley in 1989.
As well, with some friends, some Liverpool fans from Cyprus. They came all the way to London to see Liverpool beat Wimbledon, but they didn't, and they were really shocked. Now, I think Donna's point about the ripple effect, it really is important that where a council, where organisations are putting together a stadium, we need to get everyone else around that area, all the stakeholders, all any big warehouses, anyone to be jealous, to have copycat tactics, and to get the whole area taking off in a big way. The COVID pandemic has seen what it's like not to have activity, has seen our high street slow. We know what it's like to have ghost towns. We don't want that, and stadium bring activity.
Yes. Tom, final word from you if there's anything you wanted to add.
Yes, I think just building on what Stephen said there, I think, you know, this idea that stadiums somehow are not part of the city fabric. I hope people who've looked at this talk today will understand just how significant a part stadiums can play. You look at these case studies, they're often built in areas where there isn't any attraction for developers to necessarily build. And you've seen it in Tottenham, you've seen it in a number of the other projects. The stadium is often the first piece that has to go in. People have to commit to that. And then as we've been talking, it can then have this amazing ripple effect.
Thank you. And Sean, the final word.
Yeah, just really to say that this morning's all been about sporting-led regeneration. As we come out of the pandemic, looking forward to, as I say, a Twin Olympic Pad Eye Centre charging ahead in the summer as a statement of intent in terms of looking at new facilities to cater for what we need to be doing in terms of sport physical activity. That's an area we mustn't lose sight of in terms of safeguarding, developing, and that mindset change. I think it'll be crucial, and I think there's some great lessons this morning we've picked up from these great developments to help us progress. And as you said earlier, Robert, I think there's an area of research for the NLA to pick up on perhaps as we do come out of the pandemic.
I agree. I'm going to finish with an anecdote from 1996. Paul Sargent, who was running Wembley Stadium then for the Euros, got a phone call from the Ritz just a few days before the opening of the event to say that somebody called Pele was keen to come and have a private tour around the stadium before he commentated for Brazilian television. And Paul welcomed Pele the following morning, arriving in a limo, and took him on a quiet walk around the stadium. They were standing in the Royal Box, Pele there in his suit, in his loafers, and he asked for a football. And Paul radioed, back in those days, some bloke turned up with a football, and Pele took the ball and walked down to the centre spot and dribbled it to one end and scored. Picked the ball up, went back to the centre spot and dribbled to the other end and scored, and then came back and handed the ball to Paul and said, "I never scored at Wembley and I always wanted to." And I think that story, and it is true, it's in a book, as James knows. I dug it out, got Paul Sargent to verify it. It shows you the power of sport to me and the draw of a great iconic venue like Wembley or Spurs or Brentford, as it will be when they're promoted next season. And I think it's a rather nice anecdote to end with. But I want to first thank the speakers and the panellists very much indeed. I want to thank the NLA for, as ever, running a seamlessly smooth event. And I want to thank the sponsors of the Changing Face of London programme, Atkins and GL Hearn, who are the champion sponsors with us. Argent, Barclay Group, British Land, Canary Wharf, City of London, the Crown Estate, Delancey, Derwent, Peabody, Guittari Deer, Quintain and Stanhope. Very much hope that many of you will see the book coming out on the Changing Face of London, hopefully in March or April, and the exhibition that was at Store Street hopefully will come back again later on this year, and we can look again at the future of London and these great sporting projects that are driving some of the regeneration. So thank you all very much indeed for tuning in this morning. Thank you for the questions. Sorry I couldn't get to a few more this morning, but I hope you enjoyed the debate. And we now say goodbye. Have a good day. Stay safe and well. Goodbye.